The gunshot that killed Sarah's husband echoed across the prairie for 3 full seconds before her knees hit the dry Texas soil, and in that moment, she knew her life had just split clean in two between before and after. The year was 1873, and the dusty town of Prescott, Texas, had seen its share of violence, but nothing quite prepared Sarah Mitchell for the sight of her husband Thomas bleeding out in front of the general store over a dispute about marked cards. She was 23 years old, with 2 small children waiting at home, and suddenly the world felt impossibly vast and terrifyingly empty. The man who shot Thomas mounted his horse and rode out of town before the sheriff could even load his gun, disappearing into the endless expanse of brown grass and blue sky that seemed to swallow everything whole out here on the frontier. Sarah stood there in her faded calico dress, hands trembling, watching as Doc Henderson knelt beside Thomas and slowly shook his head. The finality of that gesture made her stomach drop. Around her, townspeople whispered and stared, but none of them stepped forward to help. She was alone now, truly alone, with a 6-year-old son named Jacob and a 4-year-old daughter named Emma, who would ask where their father was when she walked through the door of their small cabin on the edge of town. The funeral was held 2 days later, under a merciless sun that beat down on the small gathering of mourners. Reverend Walsh spoke words that Sarah barely heard, something about dust and ashes and the kingdom of heaven. She kept thinking about the beans in her cupboard, how there were maybe enough for 3 more days if she stretched them thin. Thomas had worked odd jobs around town, breaking horses mostly, and sometimes helping with cattle drives when the big ranches needed extra hands. The money had never been much, but it had been something. Now there was nothing. After the service, Mrs. Hendricks from the boarding house approached with a tight smile and a basket of bread. "I am sorry for your loss, dear," she said, but her eyes were already moving past Sarah, scanning the crowd for someone more interesting to talk to. The bread was stale, Sarah discovered later, hard as a rock, and probably left over from days ago. Still, she soaked it in water and fed it to her children because food was food, and beggars could not be choosers. The first week after Thomas died passed in a blur of tears and panic. Sarah tried to find work, knocking on doors around town, asking if anyone needed washing done, or floors scrubbed, or meals cooked. Most people turned her away with excuses. "Times are hard," they said, as if she did not already know that. Mrs. Peterson at the dress shop looked her up and down and said she had no need for help, though Sarah saw the piles of unfinished alterations stacked on the table behind her. Mr. Garrison at the feed store just laughed when she asked if he needed someone to keep his books, saying no woman could handle figures the way a man could. By the second week, the last of the beans were gone. Sarah boiled grass and roots to make a thin soup that her children ate without complaint, though she saw the way Jacob looked at her with questions in his dark eyes. He was too young to understand everything, but old enough to know something was terribly wrong. Emma still asked for her father every night before bed, and each time Sarah had to explain again that Papa had gone to heaven, her voice cracking on the words. Sarah tried to sell what little they had. She took Thomas's pocket watch to the pawnbroker, but he offered her only 50 cents because the mechanism was broken. She sold her wedding ring for $2, slipping it off her finger with shaking hands and trying not to think about the day Thomas had placed it there, promising to love and protect her forever. Protection seemed like a cruel joke now. She sold 2 of their 3 cooking pots, a quilt her grandmother had made, and a carved wooden horse that had been Jacob's favorite toy. He cried when she took it, and she cried too, later, where he could not see. The money lasted 4 days. On a sweltering afternoon in late June, Sarah sat on the front step of their cabin with her face in her hands, trying to figure out what to do next. The landlord had come by that morning demanding rent, and when she told him she did not have it, he said she had until the end of the week to pay or get out. Jacob and Emma were inside, listless from hunger, lying on the bed they all shared. Sarah had given them the last of the cornmeal that morning, mixing it with water to make a paste that at least filled their bellies for a few hours. There was nothing left now, not a scrap of food in the cabin, not a penny to her name, and no prospects for getting either. She heard the sound of a horse approaching and looked up to see a rider coming down the dusty road. He sat tall in the saddle, silhouetted against the bright sky, and as he drew closer, Sarah could make out more details. He wore a brown leather vest over a faded blue shirt, dark trousers, and boots that had seen a lot of miles. A black hat shaded his face, and a gun belt hung low on his hips. He was probably in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and an easy way of moving that spoke of years spent in the saddle. The cowboy slowed his horse as he passed her cabin, then stopped altogether. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. His voice was low and rough, weathered by sun and wind. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and stood up, smoothing her dress. "Afternoon," she managed. He studied her for a moment with eyes that were a striking shade of green, unusual out here where most folks had brown or blue. There was something searching in his gaze, like he could see straight through to all her troubles. "You all right?" he asked. "I am fine," she lied, lifting her chin. Pride was about all she had left. The cowboy did not look convinced. He swung down from his horse, a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze on her forehead, and walked closer. Up close, Sarah could see he had a kind face, weathered by the elements but not hardened by them. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, and his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. "Name's Nathaniel Grant," he said. "Most folks call me Nate. I am passing through, looking for the Morrison Ranch. Am I headed the right way?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "Keep following this road west for about 5 miles. You cannot miss it." He nodded slowly, but he did not move to leave. Instead, he glanced at the cabin behind her, taking in the peeling paint and the torn curtain hanging in the window. "You live here alone?" "With my children," Sarah said. "2 of them." "And your husband?" The question hit like a physical blow. Sarah's throat tightened. "He passed," she said quietly. 2 weeks ago." Something shifted in Nate's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I am sorry to hear that," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "That is a hard thing, especially out here." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. If she said anything more, she might start crying again, and she had cried enough. Nate looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see everything she was trying to hide, the hunger, the desperation, the bone-deep fear that had become her constant companion. "When did you last eat?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "This morning," she said, though it was not exactly true. She had given the children the cornmeal and taken nothing herself. "And your children?" "They ate this morning, too." Nate's jaw tightened. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth bundle, unwrapping it to reveal half a loaf of bread, some dried meat, and a wedge of cheese. He held it out to her. "Here." Sarah stared at the food like it was a mirage that might disappear if she blinked. Her stomach cramped painfully at the sight of it. I cannot," she said, even though everything in her wanted to snatch it from his hands. "Why not?" "I do not take charity." "It is not charity," Nate said. "It is just food I am not going to eat. I will get a meal at the ranch tonight, so this will just go to waste in my saddlebag. You would be doing me a favor by taking it." Sarah looked at him, trying to gauge if he was mocking her, but she saw only sincerity in his face. Still, she hesitated. She had her pride, even if it was the only thing she had left. As if sensing her resistance, Nate glanced toward the cabin again. "How old are your children?" he asked. "Jacob is 6 and Emma is 4. He looked back at her, and this time there was something almost fierce in his expression. "Then take the food," he said, his voice firm. "Not for you, for them." That was what broke her. Sarah felt the tears start to fall before she could stop them, hot and fast down her cheeks. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. All the fear and exhaustion and despair of the past 2 weeks came pouring out, and she could not seem to stop it. Nate stepped closer, still holding out the food. "Hey now," he said gently. "It is all right." "It is not all right," Sarah choked out. "Nothing is all right. I cannot feed them. I can barely feed them." The words came tumbling out in a rush, all the terror she had been keeping locked inside. "I have no food, no money, no way to get any. The landlord is going to throw us out in 3 days, and I do not know what to do. I do not know how to keep them safe." She was crying in earnest now, shoulders shaking, and she did not even care that she was falling apart in front of a complete stranger. What did it matter? What did any of it matter when her children were going hungry and she was powerless to help them? Nate set the food down on the step and did something that surprised her. He reached out and put a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "Listen to me," he said, waiting until she looked up at him through her tears. "You are not going to lose your children. You are not going to be thrown out on the street. I am going to help you. Sarah shook her head. You do not understand. I have nothing to give you in return. I cannot pay you back. I am not asking you to pay me back. But why? Sarah wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Nate was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on her shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Because somebody helped me once when I needed it, he said, and because it is the right thing to do. He picked up the bundle of food again and pressed it into her hands. Now take this inside and feed your children. Then we are going to figure out what comes next. Sarah looked down at the food in her hands, then back up at Nate's face. There was no pity there, just a calm determination that made her want to believe him. I do not understand, she whispered. You do not have to understand, Nate said. He took a step back and gestured toward the cabin door. Go on, get them fed. I will wait here. Sarah did not have the strength to argue anymore. She turned and went inside, where Jacob and Emma were sitting on the bed, watching her with wide eyes. Mama, who is that man? Jacob asked. His name is Mr. Grant, Sarah said, setting the food down on the table with shaking hands. And he brought us something to eat. The children scrambled off the bed and rushed to the table. Sarah divided the food between them, making sure they each got equal portions, and watched as they ate with desperate hunger. Emma made little sounds of happiness as she chewed the bread, and Jacob closed his eyes like he was savoring every bite. Sarah took a small piece of cheese for herself, and the taste of it was so good it almost made her cry again. When the children had finished eating, Sarah told them to stay inside and went back outside to where Nate was waiting. He had unsaddled his horse and was brushing her down, his movements practiced and efficient. He looked up when Sarah approached. They get enough to eat? Yes, Sarah said. Thank you. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. Nate finished brushing his horse and turned to face her fully. Now, let us talk about your situation. You said the landlord wants you out in 3 days? Sarah nodded. I owe him for this month's rent, $12. And you have no income? No, I have tried to find work, but no one will hire me. Nate frowned, thinking. What about family? Is there anyone who could help? Thomas and I came out here from Missouri 5 years ago. My parents died when I was young, and I have no siblings. Thomas had a brother back east, but we have not heard from him in years. There is no one. Friends? Sarah laughed bitterly. Friends disappear fast when you have nothing to offer them. Nate's frown deepened. He looked out at the horizon, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, then back at Sarah. All right, he said. Here is what we are going to do. I am going to pay your rent for this month, which will buy us some time. Then I am going to find you work. What kind of work? The Morrison Ranch is looking for a cook, Nate said. The last one quit 3 weeks ago, and the hands have been complaining about the food ever since. I know because I worked there last year during the fall roundup. Old man Morrison is a hard man, but he is fair, and he pays decent wages. If I vouch for you, he will hire you. Sarah felt a flutter of hope in her chest, fragile as a bird's wing. You would do that for me? I would. But why? She asked again, because she still could not understand it. Men did not help women for nothing. There was always a price, always something they wanted in return. Nate seemed to read the worry in her eyes. I am not asking for anything from you, he said firmly. I am offering help because you need it, and I can give it. That is all. No strings, no expectations. Sarah searched his face for any sign of deceit and found none. Still, years of hard living had taught her to be cautious. I need to think about my children, she said slowly. If I work at the ranch, what happens to them? You can bring them with you, Nate said. The ranch has a bunkhouse for families, small cabins really, for the married hands. Morrison will let you stay in one of those. Your children can play with the other ranch kids during the day while you work. It sounded too good to be true, which made Sarah suspicious. And you? She asked. Will you be working there too? I was planning on it, Nate said. Morrison always needs good hands, and I am good with horses. But if it makes you uncomfortable, I can move on. Find work somewhere else. No, Sarah said quickly, surprising herself. The truth was, the thought of going to a strange ranch where she knew no one was terrifying. Having at least one friendly face there made it seem less daunting. No, you do not have to do that. I want to make sure I understand what I am agreeing to. You are agreeing to honest work for honest pay, Nate said. "Nothing more, nothing less. I will help you get settled, make sure Morrison treats you fair, and then after that, you are on your own if that is what you want. Or, if you need a friend, I will be around." Sarah took a deep breath. It felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. But what choice did she have? She could stay here and starve, or she could take a chance on this stranger's kindness. "All right," she said. "I will do it." Nate's face broke into a smile, and it transformed him completely. He looked younger, less weathered, and Sarah realized he was actually quite handsome when he smiled. "Good," he said. "We will leave first thing in the morning. Pack whatever you need to bring. I will take care of the landlord tonight." True to his word, Nate went into town that evening and paid Sarah's landlord the $12 she owed. When he came back, he also brought more food, a bag of flour and cornmeal, some salt pork, dried beans, and even a small sack of peppermint sticks that he gave to Jacob and Emma. The children's faces lit up with joy, and Emma threw her arms around Nate's legs in an impulsive hug that made him laugh. That night, Sarah lay awake on her narrow bed, listening to her children's soft breathing beside her. For the first time in 2 weeks, her stomach was full, and she had a plan for tomorrow. She thought about Nathaniel Grant, trying to figure him out. He was a puzzle, this quiet cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere, and upended her life with his unexpected kindness. Sarah had learned to be wary of men, even before Thomas died. Her husband had been a good man in many ways, but he had also been reckless, quick to anger, and too fond of gambling. Those weaknesses had ultimately gotten him killed. Nate seemed different. There was a steadiness to him, a calm strength that reminded Sarah of the deep-rooted trees that somehow managed to grow in this harsh landscape. But she barely knew him, she reminded herself. One act of kindness did not tell her who he really was. She would have to be careful, guard her heart, and protect her children. They could not afford another loss. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah woke early and packed their meager belongings into 2 bags, everything they owned in the world. It was not much. A few changes of clothes, a comb, a small Bible that had been her mother's, and a tin daguerreotype of her and Thomas on their wedding day. She looked at it for a long moment before tucking it away. That life was over now. This was a new beginning. Nate arrived just after sunrise, leading his horse and a sturdy mule that he said they could use to carry their things. He helped Sarah load the bags onto the mule's back, then lifted Emma up to sit in the saddle of his horse. Jacob insisted he was big enough to walk, puffing out his chest with pride. But after an hour on the dusty road, he was tired, and Nate hoisted him up behind his sister without comment. The walk to the Morrison ranch took most of the morning. Nate kept the pace easy, mindful of the children and of Sarah, who was already tired from stress and hunger and lack of sleep. He told them stories as they walked, tales of cattle drives and wild horses, stampedes and river crossings. Jacob listened with rapt attention, asking 100 questions, and even Emma perked up, giggling when Nate made funny voices for the different characters in his stories. Sarah walked beside him, grateful for his easy manner with her children. Thomas had loved them, she did not doubt that. But he had never been playful like this. He had been too worried about money, too stressed about making ends meet, to spend much time just talking and laughing with Jacob and Emma. Watching Nate with them now, Sarah felt a pang of sadness for all the moments they had missed. They arrived at the Morrison Ranch just before noon. It was a sprawling operation, one of the largest in this part of Texas, with a big main house, several barns, corrals full of horses, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Cattle dotted the surrounding hills, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Sarah had never seen so many cows in one place. Nate led them to the main house and told them to wait outside while he went to speak with Morrison. Sarah stood in the yard, holding Emma's hand and trying not to look as nervous as she felt. Jacob pressed close to her side. "Mama, are we going to live here?" he asked. "I think so," Sarah said, "if Mr. Morrison gives me the job." "I like Mr. Nate," Emma announced. "He is nice." "Yes, he is," Sarah agreed, watching the front door of the house. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, Nate emerged with an older man, who Sarah assumed was Morrison. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and a weathered face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He studied Sarah with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "So you are the widow Nate told me about," he said. "Yes, sir, Sarah Mitchell. Nate says you need work and you can cook." "I can cook, sir. I am not fancy, but I can make good hearty meals that will stick to a man's ribs." Morrison grunted. "That is all my hands care about. They do not need fancy. They need food that will keep them going from sunup to sundown." He looked at the children. "Those yours?" "Yes, sir, Jacob and Emma." "They cause trouble?" "No, sir. They are good children." Morrison studied them for another moment, then nodded. "All right. The job is yours if you want it. $30 a month plus room and board. You will cook 3 meals a day for however many hands are here, usually about 20 men, sometimes more during busy seasons. You will also be responsible for keeping the cookhouse clean and ordering supplies. I will give you a budget for that. Sundays you get off after breakfast. The cabin you will stay in is behind the bunkhouse. It is small, but it is clean, and the roof does not leak. You can move in today." Sarah felt dizzy with relief. $30 a month was more than she had dared hope for. "Thank you, sir. I will not let you down." "See that you do not," Morrison said. "I do not tolerate laziness or waste, but if you work hard, you will be treated fair. That is how I run things here." He turned and went back inside, and Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Nate grinned at her. "Told you he would hire you." "I cannot believe it," Sarah said. "A job, a place to live, regular wages. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Nate assured her. "Come on, let me show you the cabin." The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a fireplace, a bed, a table, and 2 chairs. But it was clean like Morrison had said, and after the drafty place they had been living in, it felt almost luxurious. There was a window with real glass, a wooden floor instead of packed dirt, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. Sarah set their bags down and looked around, trying not to cry again. Emma immediately climbed onto the bed and bounced, delighting in the corn husk mattress that rustled beneath her. "What do you think?" Nate asked from the doorway. "I think it is wonderful," Sarah said honestly. "I cannot thank you enough for this, Nate. You have given me and my children a future." He shook his head. "You did that yourself by being brave enough to take the chance. I just helped point you in the right direction." He glanced outside. "I should go talk to Morrison about my own job, let you get settled in. The cookhouse is that building over there with the big chimney. Supper is at 6 o'clock. One of the other hands can show you around and help you get your bearings." "Will I see you at supper?" Sarah asked, then felt foolish for asking. Of course she would see him. He would be one of the hands she was cooking for. But Nate did not seem to think it was a foolish question. He smiled at her, that warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You will see me at supper," he promised. "And every other meal too, probably. I am not going anywhere." After he left, Sarah spent the afternoon exploring the cookhouse and taking stock of what she had to work with. It was a well-equipped kitchen with a big cast-iron stove, plenty of pots and pans, and a larder stocked with basics like flour, beans, salt pork, and dried fruit. There was even a small garden out back with vegetables growing, tomatoes and squash and green beans. Sarah felt the knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. She could do this. She knew how to cook, had been cooking for her family since she was a girl. This was just cooking for more people. She made stew for supper that first night, using the salt pork and vegetables, and baked several loaves of bread in the big oven. When 6 o'clock came, the ranch hands filed in, dusty and tired from a long day's work. They were a rough-looking bunch, weathered and sunburned, but they nodded politely to Sarah and minded their manners. Nate came in with them, and Sarah was glad to see a familiar face in the sea of strangers. The men ate with enthusiasm, going back for seconds and thirds, and when they were finished, several of them came to tell Sarah it was the best meal they had eaten in weeks. Morrison himself stopped by the cookhouse to tell her she had done well, which from him seemed like high praise. That night, Sarah tucked her children into the bed in their new cabin and lay down beside them, exhausted but content. She had survived, they had survived. Tomorrow she would wake up and do it all again, and the day after that, and the day after that. She had work, she had a roof over their heads, and she had food to put on the table. It was more than she had dared hope for just 24 hours ago. And she had Nathaniel Grant to thank for it all. Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into a routine at the Morrison Ranch. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, feeding the hands bacon and eggs and hot cakes and gallons of strong coffee. She made hearty lunches that the men could eat quickly before heading back out to work, and dinners that were filling and plentiful. The work was hard, standing on her feet for hours, cooking over the hot stove, washing endless piles of dishes. But it was honest work, and at the end of each day, Sarah felt the satisfaction of a job well done. Jacob and Emma adapted quickly to ranch life. Jacob spent his days following the cowboys around, pestering them with questions and begging to learn how to rope. Emma made friends with the ranch foreman's daughter, a girl about her age named Lily, and the two of them played for hours in the dirt, making elaborate games out of sticks and rocks. And Nate was there, a steady presence in Sarah's new life. He worked as a horse wrangler, breaking the wild mustangs that the ranch hands brought in from the open range. Sarah sometimes watched him from the cookhouse window, marveling at his skill and patience. He never forced the horses, never used cruelty or violence. Instead, he seemed to gentle them with a combination of firmness and kindness, earning their trust bit by bit until they would accept a saddle and rider. He always showed up for meals, sitting at the long table with the other hands, but making a point to catch Sarah's eye and smile. Sometimes he stayed after everyone else had left, helping her clean up the dishes and put away the food. They talked during those times, easy conversations about their days, about the ranch, about nothing in particular. Sarah found herself looking forward to those moments, to the sound of his voice and the way he listened when she spoke, really listened like what she said mattered. She tried not to read too much into it. Nate was being friendly, that was all. He had helped her because he was a good man, not because he wanted anything from her. Sarah reminded herself of this constantly, especially when she caught herself watching for him, or feeling disappointed when he had to leave early to tend to a sick horse, or help with some other ranch business. She could not afford to be foolish. She was a widow with 2 children and no prospects. What would a man like Nate want with her? He could have his pick of women, young pretty girls, without the baggage of a ready-made family. No, it was better to keep her distance, to be grateful for his friendship and not hope for anything more. But hope, Sarah was discovering, was a stubborn thing. It crept in despite her best efforts to keep it at bay. One evening, about a month after they arrived at the ranch, Nate showed up at the cookhouse with a small wooden horse he had carved. "For Jacob," he said, handing it to Sarah. "I noticed he lost his old one." Sarah stared at the horse, beautifully crafted with careful detail, a mane and tail that looked almost real. "Nate, you did not have to do this." "I wanted to," he said simply. "Is he around? I thought I could give it to him myself." "He is at the cabin with Emma. They were both tired, so I let them go to bed early." "Oh," Nate looked disappointed. "Well, you can give it to him tomorrow then. Or you could come back to the cabin with me and give it to him yourself," Sarah heard herself say. "I am sure he would love to see you." Nate's face brightened. "Are you sure? I do not want to intrude." "You are not intruding," Sarah said, and realized she meant it. Having Nate around never felt like an intrusion. It felt natural, right? Like he belonged there. They walked to the cabin together through the warm evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. Jacob was sitting on the front step, throwing pebbles at a tin can he had set up as a target. When he saw Nate, he jumped up with excitement. "Mr. Nate, did you come to visit?" "I did," Nate said, "and I brought you something." He held out the carved horse. Jacob took it with reverent hands, his eyes going wide. "You made this? For me?" "I did. I thought you might like it." "I love it." Jacob hugged the horse to his chest, then looked up at Nate with such adoration that Sarah felt her heart squeeze. "Thank you, Mr. Nate. Thank you so much." "You are welcome, buddy." Emma came running out of the cabin, drawn by the sound of voices, and she wanted to see the horse, too. Nate ended up sitting on the step with both children, telling them one of his stories while they took turns examining the carved toy. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching them, and felt something shift inside her. This was what she wanted, she realized. Not just survival, not just making it from one day to the next. She wanted this. A home, laughter, someone to share the load with. She wanted Nate. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah had sworn to herself that she would not fall for him, that she would keep her heart protected. But it was too late for that. Somewhere along the way, without her permission or intent, she had started to care for him deeply. Maybe it had happened that first day when he offered her food and refused to take no for an answer. Maybe it had been gradual, growing slowly over weeks of shared meals and quiet conversations. It did not matter when it happened. It had happened, and now Sarah did not know what to do about it. She could not tell him, that much was certain. What if he did not feel the same way? The humiliation would be unbearable, and worse, it might drive him away. She could not risk losing his friendship, not when it had become so important to her. Better to stay silent and take what she could get, even if it was only friendship. But keeping silent proved harder than Sarah expected. Over the following weeks, she found herself hyper-aware of Nate's presence. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his voice dropped lower when he was talking just to her, the way his hand sometimes brushed against hers when he handed her a dish to dry. Every small interaction felt charged with meaning, and Sarah did not know if she was imagining it, or if maybe, just maybe, he felt something too. July turned into August, and the heat became oppressive. The ranch hands worked longer hours, taking advantage of the good weather to get as much done as possible before the fall. Sarah's days in the cookhouse were sweltering, the big stove making the already hot room feel like an oven. She drank water constantly and still felt parched, and at night she lay awake in the cabin, too hot to sleep, listening to the sound of crickets outside. One evening after dinner, Nate found her sitting on the step of the cookhouse, fanning herself with her apron. "You look about done in," he said. "It is this heat," Sarah said. "I feel like I cannot get a full breath." "Come on," Nate said, holding out his hand. "I want to show you something." Sarah hesitated, then took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His palm was rough and calloused against hers, warm and solid. "What about the children?" she asked. "I saw them playing with Lily over by the foreman's cabin. They are fine for a bit." He led her away from the main buildings, out past the corrals, and into the open land beyond. They walked for maybe 10 minutes, following a narrow path through the brush, until they came to a small creek that Sarah had not known was there. The water was shallow but clear, running over smooth stones, and the trees growing along the banks provided blessed shade. "I found this spot my first week here," Nate said. "Come out here sometimes when I need to get away from everything. Thought you might like it." "It is beautiful," Sarah said, and it was. After weeks of dust and heat and the constant bustle of the ranch, the creek felt like an oasis. "Go ahead and put your feet in if you want," Nate said. "The water is cold. It will help you cool down." Sarah did not need to be told twice. She sat down on the bank and pulled off her worn boots, then hiked up her skirts and dipped her feet into the water. It was shockingly cold, fed by some underground spring, and it felt absolutely wonderful. She let out a sigh of pure relief. Nate sat down beside her, pulling off his own boots and rolling up his pant legs. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the rushing of the water and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Sarah felt the tension of the day slowly draining away. "Can I ask you something?" Nate said after a while. "Of course." "Do you ever think about leaving? The ranch, I mean, going somewhere else, starting over fresh?" Sarah considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But where would I go? This is the first place I have felt secure since Thomas died. I have work I'm good at, a place to live, and my children are safe and happy. Why would I leave that?" "No reason," Nate said. "I was just curious." "Do you think about leaving?" Sarah asked, turning to look at him. "I think about it," Nate said slowly. "But not like I used to. I have spent most of my life drifting from place to place, never staying anywhere too long. It was easier that way, not getting attached. But lately I have been thinking maybe it is time to put down roots somewhere." "Here?" Sarah asked, her heart beating faster. "Maybe." Nate looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Sarah's breath catch. "I have found reasons to want to stay." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Sarah felt like she was standing on the edge of that cliff again, about to jump. She should say something, but she did not know what. Did he mean her? Was he saying he wanted to stay because of her? Before she could work up the courage to ask, Nate looked away, breaking the spell. "We should probably head back," he said. "It is getting dark." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. They put their boots back on and walked back to the ranch in near silence. When they reached the main yard, Nate said goodnight and headed toward the bunkhouse, and Sarah went to collect her children and put them to bed. That night she lay awake again, but this time it was not the heat keeping her up. It was the memory of the way Nate had looked at her by the creek, the possibility that maybe her feelings were not as one-sided as she had thought. But what if she was wrong? What if she was reading too much into a simple kindness? Sarah pressed her hands to her face and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She could not afford to make a mistake here. Too much was riding on it. But she also could not shake the feeling that something important had almost happened down by the creek, something that had been interrupted before it could fully form. She would have to be patient, she decided. Wait and see what Nate did next. If he felt the same way she did, surely he would make some move, give some sign. And if he did not, well, she would learn to live with it. She had survived worse things than unrequited feelings, but oh, she hoped she would not have to. The next few days passed in a blur of work and waiting. Sarah found herself watching Nate more closely, trying to decipher his feelings. He seemed the same as always, friendly and kind, helping with dishes and playing with her children. But there were moments when she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something soft and almost wondering. Or maybe she was just seeing what she wanted to see. On Saturday evening, after the dinner dishes were done, Morrison called all the hands together in the yard. "We are going to have a dance tomorrow night," he announced. "It has been a hard summer, and you all have worked well. Figured you earned a celebration. I have invited folks from town and the neighboring ranches. There will be music and food, and I expect everyone to be on their best behavior. Any man who gets drunk and causes trouble will be out of a job." "Understood." The hands nodded and murmured their agreement. Morrison turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, I will need you to prepare extra food for tomorrow. I will give you a bigger budget. Make whatever you think best." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. After Morrison dismissed them, the other hands scattered, talking excitedly about the dance. Sarah stood in the yard, feeling a flutter of nervousness. A dance meant music and laughter and people in their best clothes. It meant men and women pairing off, holding each other close as they moved to the rhythm. She had not been to a dance since before she was married, and even then she had been too shy to enjoy it much. "You will go, will not you?" Nate asked, appearing at her elbow. Sarah jumped slightly. "I do not know. I have so much work to do, preparing the food." "You cannot work all the time," Nate said. "And besides, Morrison said there will be food. He did not say you had to serve it too. Come to the dance, Sarah. Have some fun for once." "I do not have anything to wear," Sarah said, which was true. Her few dresses were all faded and worn, suitable for working, but not for a party. "You would look beautiful in anything," Nate said, and then seemed to realize what he had said. A flush crept up his neck. "I just mean, you do not need anything fancy. No one expects that out here." Sarah felt her own cheeks heating. "Maybe," she said. "I will think about it." "Think hard," Nate said. And there was something in his voice that made her look up at him. "I would really like it if you came." He held her gaze for a moment, and Sarah felt that electric charge again, the sense that they were talking about something more than just a dance. "All right," she heard herself say. "I will be there." Nate's face broke into a grin. "Good," he said. "That is real good." The next day was a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah spent hours in the cookhouse, baking pies and cakes, roasting chickens, making potato salad and coleslaw and baked beans. Some of the ranch wives came to help, women Sarah had not had much chance to talk to before. They worked together in easy camaraderie, chatting and laughing as they cooked. One of them, a woman named Martha, who was married to the foreman, pulled Sarah aside at one point. "I have an extra dress," she said. "Nothing fancy, but it is nicer than what you are wearing now. Would you like to borrow it for tonight?" Sarah was touched by the offer. "Are you sure?" "Of course. We are about the same size, I think. Come by my cabin before the dance starts and we will get you fixed up." That evening, Sarah did just that. Martha's dress was a deep blue calico, with a full skirt and fitted bodice, much nicer than anything Sarah owned. Martha helped her into it, then brushed out Sarah's long brown hair and pinned it up in a style that was both simple and pretty. When Sarah looked at herself in Martha's small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked young again, almost pretty, like she had before years of hardship had worn her down. "You look beautiful," Martha said firmly. "Now go on out there and enjoy yourself." The dance was held in the yard between the main house and the bunkhouse. Lanterns had been strung up on poles, casting a warm glow over everything. A few of the hands had formed a band, playing fiddle and guitar and harmonica, and the music filled the air. People milled about, talking and laughing, plates of food in hand. Sarah stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling nervous and out of place. She saw Nate across the yard, talking to some of the other cowboys, and he looked up as if sensing her presence. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw his expression change, saw the surprise, and then something else, something warmer and more intense. He excused himself from the conversation and walked over to her, not taking his eyes off her the entire time. "Sarah," he said when he reached her, and his voice sounded a little breathless. You look beautiful." "Thank you," Sarah managed. "Martha lent me the dress." "It is not the dress," Nate said. "It is you." The music shifted to a slower tune, and couples began pairing off to dance. Nate held out his hand. "Would you dance with me?" Sarah's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I am not a very good dancer," she warned. "Neither am I," Nate said. "We will figure it out together." She placed her hand in his, and he led her out to the area where people were dancing. He put one hand on her waist, and she rested hers on his shoulder, and then they were moving, swaying to the music. Nate had lied, Sarah realized. He was actually a good dancer, leading her smoothly through the steps. Or maybe it just felt that way because she was with him. They danced in silence for a while, and Sarah was intensely aware of every point of contact between them. His hand on her waist, warm through the fabric of the dress, her hand in his. Calloused palm against calloused palm, two people who knew what hard work felt like. The way he was looking at her, like she was the only person in the world. "I need to tell you something," Nate said suddenly. Sarah's breath caught. "What?" He was quiet for a moment, like he was trying to find the right words. "I have been drifting my whole life," he said finally. "Never had a place I called home, never had people I cared about enough to stay for. And then I met you, and everything changed." "Nate," Sarah whispered, but he shook his head. "Let me finish," he said. "I know you have been through a lot. I know you are still grieving your husband and trying to build a life for your children. I do not want to rush you or pressure you into anything, but I need you to know how I feel. I care about you, Sarah, more than I have ever cared about anyone. And those kids of yours, I care about them too. When I think about the future, about putting down roots and building something permanent, I see you in that picture, all three of you." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I care about you too," she said, her voice shaking. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too soon, or that I was being foolish. But I cannot help it. You have been so good to us, Nate. You gave me hope when I had none left." "So what do we do about it?" Nate asked, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made Sarah want to reach up and touch his face. "I do not know," she admitted. "This is all so new. I have not thought about any man except Thomas in years, and now here you are, and I do not know how to do this." "We take it slow," Nate said. "One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations. We just see where this goes. What do you say?" Sarah thought about it, thought about everything she had been through, everything she stood to gain or lose. And then she thought about the way Nate had shown up at her cabin that first day like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. The way he had looked at her and seen someone worth helping, worth caring about. The way he made her laugh and made her children happy and made her feel, for the first time in a long time, like maybe she deserved good things too. "I say yes," she told him. "Yes to all of it." Nate's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He pulled her a little closer, and they continued to dance, wrapped up in their own world while the music played and the lanterns swung in the breeze. The rest of the summer passed in a haze of happiness. Sarah and Nate began courting officially, though there was nothing official about it really. They just spent time together whenever they could, stealing moments between work obligations. Nate would show up at the cookhouse and help her with dinner prep, and they would talk as they chopped vegetables and stirred pots. On Sundays, they would take the children down to the creek for picnics, spreading out a blanket and eating cold chicken and fresh bread, while Jacob and Emma splashed in the shallow water. Slowly, carefully, Sarah let herself believe that this could be real, that she could have a second chance at happiness, at love. Nate never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He was patient and gentle, seeming to understand without being told that she needed time to adjust to the idea of being with someone new. But the more time they spent together, the more Sarah found herself wanting more. She loved the way Nate made her laugh with his dry humor and silly stories. She loved watching him with her children, the way he treated them with respect and kindness, never talking down to them or dismissing their concerns. She loved the quiet moments at the end of long days when they sat together and watched the sun set, not needing to fill the silence with words. And she loved the way he looked at her, like she was precious and valued and worth protecting. One evening in September, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Nate sat together on the step of her cabin. The air had finally started to cool with the approach of fall, and it was pleasant to sit outside in the evening. Nate had his arm around her shoulders, and Sarah was leaning into him, comfortable and content. "I have been thinking," Nate said quietly. "About what?" "About us, about the future." He shifted slightly so he could look at her. "Sarah, I know we have not been courting very long, and I know you might think this is too fast, but I am not a young man, and I have wasted enough of my life already. I do not want to waste any more." Sarah's heart started to beat faster. "What are you saying?" Nate reached into his pocket and pulled something out. It was a ring, simple and silver, with a small blue stone set in it. "I am saying I want to marry you," he said. "I want to be a husband to you and a father to your children. I want to build a life with you, a real life, with a real home. I love you, Sarah. I have loved you since the day I met you, when you were crying on your front step and trying so hard to be brave. Will you marry me?" Sarah stared at the ring, then at Nate's face, and felt tears streaming down her cheeks. But they were happy tears this time, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming gratitude. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Nate let out a breath like he had been holding it. And then he was laughing, and she was laughing, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and Sarah looked at it sparkling in the moonlight and could not quite believe this was real. "I love you too," she said, realizing she had not said it yet. "I love you so much, Nate. I did not think I could feel this way again, but you proved me wrong." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet, and Sarah melted into it. It was her first kiss since Thomas died, and it felt like coming home and starting a new journey all at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "When?" Sarah asked. "When do you want to get married?" "As soon as you are ready," Nate said. "Tomorrow if you want," Sarah laughed. "Not tomorrow, but soon. Maybe next month. That will give us time to plan a little bit, make it nice." "Next month sounds perfect." They told the children the next day at breakfast. Jacob was confused at first, asking if that meant Nate would be his new papa, and when Nate said yes, the boy threw himself into the cowboy's arms with such force he nearly knocked him over. Emma was thrilled at the idea of a wedding, asking if she could wear a pretty dress and if there would be cake. Morrison seemed pleased when they told him, in his gruff way. "About time you two figured it out," he said. "Everyone on the ranch has been watching you dance around each other for months. And Mitchell, when you get married, you and Nate can move into one of the bigger family cabins. The one you are in now is too small for 4 people." So plans were made. Sarah sent word to the Reverend Walsh in Prescott, asking if he would perform the ceremony. Martha and the other ranch wives helped her sew a new dress, a simple white one with lace at the collar and cuffs. Nate bought a new suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome when he tried it on. Jacob and Emma were fitted for new clothes too, and Emma practiced walking slowly like Sarah showed her, preparing to be a flower girl, even though there would be no flowers. The wedding was held on the first Saturday in October, outdoors under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Most of the ranch turned out for it, along with folks from town and neighboring spreads. Sarah walked toward Nate with Jacob on one side and Emma on the other, her children giving her away. Nate stood waiting for her with a smile so full of love and joy that Sarah felt her own heart might burst. Reverend Walsh spoke about love and commitment, about the covenant of marriage being a sacred trust. He talked about how God brought people together in unexpected ways, how even in the midst of grief and hardship, new life could bloom. Sarah barely heard the words. She was too focused on Nate, on the way he was looking at her, on the feel of his hands holding hers. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Nate kissed her in front of everyone, and Sarah kissed him back, not caring who saw. The assembled crowd cheered and clapped, and then there was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. It was, Sarah thought, the happiest day of her life. That night, in the bigger cabin Morrison had given them, Sarah and Nate put the children to bed together. Jacob and Emma each had their own small bed now, instead of sharing with Sarah, and they were excited about it. Nate told them a bedtime story, something about a brave knight and a clever princess, and Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart full. When the children were finally asleep, Nate came to her and took her hand. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Sarah said honestly. "You gave me everything, Nate. A home, a future, hope. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again." "You gave me those things too," Nate said. "Before I met you, I was just existing, going from one job to the next with no purpose. You gave me a reason to want something more. You and those kids, you are my purpose now, my family." They stood there in the small cabin, holding each other, and Sarah sent up a silent prayer of thanks for survival, for second chances, for unexpected kindness from strangers who became family, for love that came when you least expected it but needed it most. The fall passed into winter, and the ranch settled into the slower rhythms of the cold season. There was less work to do, which meant more time for Sarah and Nate to just be together as a family. They taught Jacob how to ride a horse, Nate patiently showing him how to sit properly in the saddle and how to use the reins. They let Emma help make cookies in the cookhouse, even though she got more flour on herself than in the bowl. On cold nights, they all huddled together by the fire, Nate reading aloud from books he borrowed from Morrison's surprisingly extensive library. Sarah had never known such contentment. Oh, there were hard days still. Days when she was tired, or when the children were difficult, or when money was tight. But those days were balanced by so many more good ones, and she had Nate beside her to help carry the load. That made all the difference. In February, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not been sure until she missed her second monthly cycle. The realization filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the idea of having another child, but also fear. Her last pregnancy had been difficult, and she was older now than she had been with Emma. What if something went wrong? She told Nate that night after the children were asleep. He was sitting at the table, mending a bridle, and he looked up when she came to stand beside him. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said. He must have heard something in her voice because he immediately set down the bridle and gave her his full attention. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby," Sarah said. "Our baby." For a moment, Nate just stared at her, like he had not heard correctly. Then understanding dawned on his face, followed by pure joy. "Really?" he asked, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You are sure?" "I am sure." Nate let out a whoop of happiness that startled Sarah into laughing. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down carefully, like he had just remembered she was pregnant and might break. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "A real father." "You already are a father," Sarah reminded him, "to Jacob and Emma. I know, and I love them like they are my own. But this is different. This is a baby we made together, a piece of you and a piece of me." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child." Sarah covered his hand with her own. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Nate said. "I am overjoyed. I am terrified. I am grateful. I am all of it at once." He looked at her seriously. "Are you happy? I know this is sudden, and we have only been married a few months." "I am happy," Sarah said, and realized it was true. The fear was there, yes, but it was overshadowed by happiness. "I am so happy, Nate," they told Jacob and Emma a few days later. Jacob seemed unsure about the idea of a new sibling at first, worried that a baby would take up all of Sarah and Nate's attention. But Nate sat him down and explained that love was not a finite resource, that having another child would not mean they loved him any less. Emma was simply excited, already planning all the things she would teach the baby. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Sarah's belly grew, so did the sense of anticipation in their little family. Nate was attentive and careful, making sure Sarah did not overwork herself, taking on extra chores around the cabin to lighten her load. The other ranch women shared advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, welcoming Sarah fully into their community. In late September of 1874, just a few days before what would have been Sarah and Nate's first wedding anniversary, Sarah went into labor. It was a long, difficult process, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Sarah was not sure she could continue. But Nate was there the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragements and promises. And finally, as the sun was rising on a new day, Sarah brought a baby boy into the world. He was small and red-faced and perfect, with a surprising amount of dark hair and lungs that worked very well, announcing his arrival with lusty cries. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Sarah's arms, and she looked down at her son with tears streaming down her face. "He is beautiful," Nate said, his own voice thick with emotion. "You did so well, Sarah. I am so proud of you." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked. They had discussed names over the past months, but had not decided on anything definite. Nate looked at the baby thoughtfully. "What about Nathan?" he suggested. "After my father, or we could call him something else if you prefer." "Nathan," Sarah repeated, trying it out. "Nathan Grant. I like it, but let us call him Nathan, not just Nate. He should have his own name, not just be a copy of yours." "Nathan it is," Nate agreed. He reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand, and Nathan immediately gripped his finger with surprising strength. Nate laughed, delighted. "He is strong. He is going to be a fighter, this one." Jacob and Emma were allowed in to meet their new brother a little while later. Jacob peered at the baby with curiosity, then gently touched his head. "He is so small," he said wonderingly. "You were small once too," Sarah told him, "and now look how big you are. Nathan will grow just like you did." Emma wanted to hold the baby, and with careful supervision, she got to cradle him for a few minutes. She beamed with pride at being trusted with such an important task. That night, after the children were asleep and Nathan was fed and changed and sleeping in the cradle Nate had built, Sarah and Nate lay together in bed, exhausted but happy. "Can you believe it?" Sarah whispered. "A year ago, I was alone and desperate and did not know how I was going to survive. And now look at us. We have a home, a family, a future. It is like a miracle." "You are the miracle," Nate said softly. "You are the strongest, bravest person I know. You survived impossible odds and came out the other side still able to love, still able to hope. That is a kind of courage most people never have." "I could not have done it without you," Sarah said. "You saved me, Nate. You and your kindness and your stubborn refusal to let me give up." "We saved each other," Nate corrected. "I was drifting before I met you, remember? You gave me a reason to stop running, to put down roots and build something real. We are a team, you and me. Partners." Sarah snuggled closer to him, feeling safe and loved and grateful. "Partners," she agreed. "I like that." The years that followed were full and busy. Nathan grew from a baby into a toddler, curious and energetic, getting into everything. Jacob turned into a capable young man, helping Nate with the horses and learning all the skills he would need to be a cowboy himself one day. Emma became a bright, talkative child who loved books and insisted Sarah teach her to read. In 1876, Sarah gave birth to another child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a quieter baby than Nathan had been, content to watch the world with solemn dark eyes. Emma was thrilled to have a sister, and she took her role as big sister very seriously, always wanting to help take care of Grace. The Morrison Ranch continued to thrive, and Nate's skill with horses earned him a reputation throughout the region. People brought their most difficult animals to him, knowing he could gentle them when no one else could. Morrison promoted him to head wrangler, which came with better pay and more responsibility. Sarah continued to cook for the ranch hands, and she became known for her pies, which some said were the best in Texas. But more than the work, more than the money or the reputation, what mattered was the family they had built, the 5 of them, plus the memory of Thomas, who would always be Jacob and Emma's father, but who Sarah had learned to remember with fondness instead of pain. She would never forget him, but she had also learned that the heart was big enough to hold more than one love. One evening in the spring of 1878, Sarah and Nate sat on the porch of their cabin, watching their children play in the yard. Jacob was teaching Nathan how to throw a rope, while Emma and Grace picked wildflowers. The sun was setting, painting everything in golden light, and Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. "What are you thinking about?" Nate asked, reaching over to take her hand. "Everything," Sarah said. "How far we have come, how different my life is now from what it was 5 years ago. Do you remember that day you first rode past my cabin?" "I remember," Nate said. "You were sitting on the step, crying. You looked so lost and so determined at the same time, like you were fighting a battle no one else could see." "I was," Sarah said. "I was fighting despair, fighting the fear that I was going to lose everything. And then you showed up, and everything changed. She squeezed his hand. You told me to eat beside you from now on, remember? When I said I could barely feed my children, you said to eat beside you, and I have been eating beside you ever since. And I plan to keep feeding you for the rest of our lives, Nate said with a smile. You and all these children we seem to keep having. Sarah laughed. 4 is plenty, I think, though you said something similar after Grace was born. Did I? I do not recall, Nate teased. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching their children play. Sarah thought about everything they had been through, all the hardships and joys, the struggles and triumphs. Life was not always easy, even now. There were still bills to pay, and children to raise, and work to be done, but they faced it all together, and that made even the hard days bearable. I love you, Sarah said suddenly, needing him to hear it. I love you too, Nate replied, more than I can say. Then do not say it, Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Just show me, every day for the rest of our lives. That is a promise I can keep, Nate said, and he kissed the top of her head. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah closed her eyes and sent up another prayer of thanks. For second chances and unexpected blessings. For a stranger who had become her husband and the father of her children. For love that had found her when she needed it most and had given her a reason to keep going. She had been broken once, shattered by loss and grief and fear, but she had been put back together, piece by piece, stronger than before, and she had Nathaniel Grant to thank for that. He had shown her that even in the darkest moments, there was still hope, still kindness, still the possibility of love. The years continued to pass in their steady way, marked by seasons and celebrations and the small moments that made up a life. Jacob turned 18 in 1885 and got his first real job as a ranch hand at a neighboring spread, though he still came home for Sunday dinners every week. Emma, 16 by then, had become a teacher at the small schoolhouse in Prescott, fulfilling a dream she had harbored since childhood. Nathan and Grace were growing fast, 9 and 7 years old respectively, full of energy and mischief. Sarah and Nate had both aged, their hair showing threads of silver, their faces marked by years of sun and wind. But they had aged together, growing closer with each passing year rather than apart. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with love and gratitude. In the fall of 1886, Morrison died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. It was a sad time for everyone on the ranch, as the old man had been a fixture in their lives for so long. His son took over the operation, and while there were some changes, the core of what made the ranch successful remained the same. The new Morrison, Robert, called Nate into his office a few weeks after his father's funeral. When Nate came home that evening, he had news. "Robert wants me to be his partner," he said, still looking a bit stunned. He said his father always intended to leave me a share of the ranch, but never got around to making it official. He wants to honor that intention. I would own 20% of the operation and have a say in all the major decisions. Sarah threw her arms around him, thrilled and proud. "That is wonderful. You deserve it, Nate. You have worked so hard for this place." "We have worked hard," Nate corrected. "This is your achievement too, Sarah. None of this would have happened if you had not taken a chance on me all those years ago." They celebrated that night with the children, making a special dinner and toasting with apple cider. Jacob rode in from his own ranch to join them, and Emma brought her beau, a young man named Samuel, who worked at the general store in town. It was loud and chaotic and perfect, their family all together. Later, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Sarah and Nate walked out to the creek where he had taken her that first summer. It looked much the same as it had 13 years ago, the water still running clear and cold over the smooth stones. They sat on the bank in their usual spot, holding hands. "Do you ever think about how things might have turned out differently?" Sarah asked. "What if you had not ridden past my cabin that day? What if you had just kept going?" "I think about it sometimes," Nate admitted. "But not because I wish things were different. I think about it because I am grateful for every choice that led me to you. Every decision I made, every road I took, all of it brought me to that moment when I saw you sitting on your step. And choosing to stop and offer help was the best decision I ever made. I was so scared," Sarah remembered. "When you offered me food, I wanted to take it so badly, but I was afraid. Afraid it was too good to be true. afraid of what you might want in return, afraid of needing someone again. And now? Now I am not afraid, Sarah said simply. Now I know that needing someone is not weakness, that accepting help is not shameful, and that love, real love, does not ask for anything except the chance to keep loving. Nate pulled her closer. You are a wise woman, Sarah Grant. I had a good teacher, Sarah said with a smile. They sat by the creek until the moon rose high overhead, talking and remembering and planning for the future. There were still dreams to chase, still goals to achieve. Jacob wanted to have his own ranch someday, and they would help him with that. Emma was talking about marrying Samuel, and there would be a wedding to plan. Nathan wanted to work with his father, learning everything about horses and ranching, and Grace, their youngest, had announced just last week that she wanted to be a doctor, which was ambitious for a girl. But Sarah was determined to support her if that was truly what she wanted. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and promise. And whatever came, Sarah knew they would face it together. That was the gift Nate had given her, not just that first day, but every day since. The knowledge that she was not alone, that she had a partner, a love, a friend who would stand beside her through whatever life brought. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, under a sky full of stars. Inside, their home was warm and welcoming, filled with the evidence of their life together. Drawings Nathan had made pinned to the walls. Books Emma loved stacked on the shelf. Baby Grace's first pair of shoes, saved as a keepsake. Photographs of their family. Frozen moments of joy and love. This was what mattered, Sarah thought, as she and Nate got ready for bed. Not the money or the property or the things they owned, but this, the life they had built, the family they had created, the love they shared. She climbed into bed beside her husband, and he put his arm around her like he did every night. "Good night, Sarah," he whispered. "Good night, Nate," she whispered back. "I love you. I love you too. Always." Sarah closed her eyes, warm and safe and content. Tomorrow there would be work to do, meals to cook, children to care for, and a ranch to help run. But tonight there was just this: peace, love, and the quiet knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The tears she had cried on that porch step 13 years ago seemed like a lifetime away now. She had been broken then, sure that her life was over. But it had not been over. It had been a beginning, though she had not known it at the time. A beginning to a love story that would span decades. A beginning to a family that would grow and thrive. A beginning to a life more beautiful than anything she could have imagined in her darkest moments. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness. A cowboy stopping to offer food to a desperate woman. A hand extended in friendship and compassion. A promise made and kept. "Then eat beside me from now on," he had said. And she had. For 13 years and counting, she had eaten beside him, lived beside him, loved beside him. And she would continue to do so for all the years they had left, however many that might be. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, their children slept peacefully, safe and secure. And in the bed they shared, Sarah and Nate held each other close. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of grief and loss. It was, Sarah thought as she drifted off to sleep, the happiest ending she could have asked for. Not an ending at all, really. Just the continuation of a love story that had begun with tears and kindness and had grown into something strong and enduring and true. A love story that would last forever. The years continued their steady march forward. In 1887, Emma married Samuel in a beautiful ceremony at the same spot where Sarah and Nate had wed 14 years earlier. Sarah cried happy tears as she watched her daughter pledge her life to the man she loved, remembering her own wedding day and how nervous and joyful she had been. Jacob met a young woman named Catherine at a church social in 1888 and courted her for 6 months before proposing. They married in the spring of 1889, and by the end of that year, Sarah and Nate were grandparents for the first time when Catherine gave birth to a baby girl they named Rose. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Sarah was overwhelmed with emotion, thinking about the circle of life and how far they had all come. Nathan proved to have his father's gift with horses, and by the time he was 16, he was already earning a reputation as one of the best young wranglers in the territory. Grace, true to her word, pursued her dream of becoming a doctor. It was not easy, as few medical schools accepted women, but she was determined and eventually gained admission to a program in San Francisco. Sarah missed her terribly when she left for school in 1895, but she was also incredibly proud of her youngest daughter's courage and ambition. Through all of this, the ranch continued to prosper. Nate and Robert Morrison made a good team, combining old wisdom with new ideas. They modernized some of their practices, brought in better breeding stock for their cattle, and expanded their operations. The ranch became one of the most successful in Texas, and Nate's share of the profits meant that the family was more comfortable than Sarah had ever imagined possible back in those desperate days after Thomas died. But the money, while nice, was not what mattered most. What mattered was that they had created something lasting, a legacy that would continue after they were gone. They had taken broken pieces and built something whole. They had turned despair into hope and loneliness into love. In the summer of 1898, the whole family gathered at the ranch to celebrate Sarah and Nate's 25th wedding anniversary. Jacob came with Catherine and their 3 children now, Rose and twin boys named Thomas and William. Emma and Samuel brought their 2 daughters, Margaret and Anne. Nathan, now 23 and still unmarried, though not for lack of female attention, made the trip from the ranch up north where he had been working. And Grace came home from San Francisco, where she had finished her medical training and was working at a hospital, one of only a handful of female doctors in the state. It was a chaotic, joyful gathering. The grandchildren ran wild around the ranch, playing the same games their parents had played years before. The adults sat around the big table in the expanded dining room, eating Sarah's cooking and telling stories and laughing until tears ran down their faces. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color, Nate stood up and tapped his glass with a fork, calling for everyone's attention. "I want to make a toast," he said, and the room quieted. 25 years ago today, I married the love of my life. It was the best decision I ever made, and I have spent every day since then grateful for it. Sarah, you have given me everything: a home, a family, a purpose. You made me into the man I always wanted to be, but never thought I could. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Here is to 25 more years together." "To Sarah and Nate," everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Sarah wiped away tears, overwhelmed by emotion. She stood up and went to stand beside her husband. "I want to say something too," she said, her voice shaking slightly. 26 years ago, I was sitting on a porch step, crying because I did not know how I was going to feed my children. I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left to live for except making sure Jacob and Emma survived. And then this man rode up and changed everything." She looked at Nate, seeing the love and devotion in his face. "He offered me food when I was starving. He offered me hope when I had none. He offered me love when I thought I would never feel it again. And he has been offering me those things every single day for 25 years. I would not be here without you, Nate. None of us would. You saved my life, and then you made it worth living." There was not a dry eye in the room by the time she finished. Nate pulled her into his arms and kissed her, not caring that their children and grandchildren were watching. When they finally pulled apart, the room erupted in applause and cheers. Later, after the celebration had wound down and everyone had gone to bed, Sarah and Nate took their familiar walk to the creek. It was a warm night, the air thick with the smell of honeysuckle and the sound of crickets. They sat in their spot, and Sarah leaned against Nate's shoulder, feeling tired but happy. 25 years, she said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Nate said. Time is strange like that. The years go by so fast, but when I try to remember my life before you, I cannot quite do it, like you have always been there, even when you were not. I feel the same way, Sarah admitted. I can remember Thomas, remember being married to him, but it is like remembering a story that happened to someone else. This is my real life. You are my real love. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water and watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Sarah thought about everything they had been through, all the trials and tribulations, the joys and sorrows. It had not all been easy. There had been hard times, lean years, and moments of worry and fear. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. "What do you think comes next?" Sarah asked eventually. "We are getting older, Nate. Our children are grown, our grandchildren are growing. What do we do with the time we have left?" "We keep living," Nate said simply. "We keep loving. We watch our grandchildren grow and hopefully meet some great-grandchildren. We work as long as we are able, and then we rest. We sit on porches and tell stories about the old days. We take care of each other when we get sick or tired, and we thank God every day for the gift we have been given. What gift is that? Each other, Nate said, squeezing her hand. We have been given each other, and that is more than most people ever get. That is enough. It is more than enough. Sarah thought about that and realized he was right. She had been given so much more than she deserved, more than she had dared to hope for in those dark days after Thomas's death. She had been given a second chance at life, at love, at happiness, and she had seized it with both hands and held on tight. Yes, she agreed. It is more than enough. It is everything. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, same as they had done thousands of times before. Inside, their home was quiet, everyone asleep. Sarah and Nate got ready for bed, moving through the familiar routine they had perfected over 25 years of marriage. And then they climbed into bed together, and Nate pulled her close, and Sarah closed her eyes with a smile on her face. This was home. This was love. This was everything she had ever wanted, and more than she had ever dreamed possible. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness from a stranger who had become her whole world. "I can barely feed them," she had said through her tears, broken and desperate and lost. "Then eat beside me from now on," he had replied, and had meant it with his whole heart. And she had. For 25 years and countless meals and infinite moments of love, she had eaten beside him. She had lived beside him. She had loved beside him. And she would continue to do so for all the days they had left, treasuring every moment, grateful for every breath, and thanking God every night for the blessing of having found each other in the vastness of the Texas prairie. The moon rose high over the ranch, casting silver light across the land. Inside the cabin, Sarah and Nate slept peacefully, wrapped in each other's arms. And outside, the world turned on, endless and eternal, full of possibility and promise for all the tomorrows yet to come. Their love story had begun with tears and desperation, but it had grown into something beautiful and enduring. It was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of love. It was a story that would be told to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passed down through the generations, as a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is always hope, always kindness, always the possibility of love, and sometimes, if you are very lucky, there is a stranger on a horse who stops to help when you need it most, and becomes the answer to prayers you did not know how to pray. That stranger becomes your partner, your love, your everything. And together, you build a life more beautiful than anything you could have imagined alone. That was Sarah and Nate's story, a story of love found in unexpected places, of hope born from despair, of a family built on a foundation of kindness and respect and devotion. It was a story with a happy ending, the kind of ending where everyone finds their place and their purpose and their peace. It was, in short, a story worth telling. And so it was told, year after year, as Sarah and Nate grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. It was told to the grandchildren who sat at their feet, wide-eyed with wonder. It was told to the young couples just starting out, as encouragement that true love does exist. It was told by the townspeople who had watched their journey, who had seen them transform from strangers into pillars of the community. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with two people sitting on a porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, having built a life together that was full of love and laughter and joy, with a family that had grown from 3 to include children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. With a simple truth that echoed through the years, that one act of kindness offered at the right moment can change everything. That love, when it is real and true, can heal wounds you thought would never mend. And that sometimes the best stories, the ones worth telling and retelling, are the ones that start with tears and end with joy. Sarah and Nate Grant lived long, full lives, and when they eventually passed, years apart because neither could bear to leave the other completely alone, they left behind a legacy of love that touched everyone who had known them. Their story became legend in that part of Texas, the tale of the cowboy and the widow who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that lasted forever. And if you had asked Sarah, in those final peaceful years of her life, What she would say to that desperate, grief-stricken woman sitting on a porch step with no hope and no future, she would have said this: "Hold on, help is coming." In the form of a cowboy on a chestnut mare, with green eyes and a kind heart and a willingness to see you, really see you, when everyone else looks away. He will offer you food, and then he will offer you so much more. He will offer you a future. Hold on just a little longer, your miracle is on its way. And that miracle's name was Nathaniel Grant, and he changed everything. The end.